Shop the Sherwin-Williams 4th of July sale and get 30% off paints and stains June 26th through July 6th. Whether you're refreshing your interior or exterior, we've got the colors to bring your vision to life. And with delivery, getting everything to your door is easier than ever. Shop online to have it delivered or visit your neighborhood Sherwin-Williams store. Click the banner to learn more. Retail sales only. Some exclusions apply. See store for details. Delivery available on qualifying orders.
I'm here on the job site with Dale, who's a framing contractor.
Hey, good morning.
Dale traded up to Geico Commercial Auto Insurance for all his business vehicles. We're here where he needs us most.
Yep, they sure are.
We make it easy for him to save on all his insurance needs, all in one place, with coverage that fits his business and bottom line. Oh, I shouldn't have looked down.
It's all right.
We're so far up here.
Look at me. Take a deep breath.
No, I'm good. So good.
Get a commercial auto insurance quote today at geico.com and see how much you could save. It feels good to Geico.
Yay Networks.
While we can all agree that switching back and forth is not preferred, there are some pros and cons to staying on daylight savings time. And with that, there are some behaviors that we can enact to override the detrimental health effects of staying on daylight savings.
A quick note before we dive into today's podcast. If you like what you hear, I would love for you to subscribe to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, wherever you download your podcast. It would also be incredible if you take a minute to rate and review this podcast. Those things do matter, and they really help us. I'm Molly Kimball. Welcome to Fueled, a wellness and nutrition podcast. I'm a registered dietitian and nutrition journalist with a passion to help people live their strongest, healthiest life possible. In my weekly TV segments and columns, there's a limited amount of time and space to cover everything, but there's so much more to share. This podcast is my opportunity to dive deeper into the topics you want to know about. In this week's episode of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, we are covering one of the great debates happening right now. It's serious business, y'all. Should daylight savings time become a permanent thing? And if you ask, however many different people you're going to ask, you're going to get that many different opinions. And it's a very polarizing question. And I'm laughing because right now in the world, there's so much happening and there's so much that is so heavy. It can be hard for us to sleep at night with all the things happening. And then we get into a conversation like daylight savings time that is very important. It's very important. You'll hear more about how it affects our health, how it affects our wellness. It affects, all these aspects of our mind and body that we're not even really aware of. So it is a very important topic. But the gravity and the passion that a lot of people go into it with, and I'm included in that. I do realize that, it's for the topic that you're going to be hearing about, it's a little bit of a fun debate. We're going to be sharing kind of like both sides of the coin. What are some of the pros and cons of it? And then I am joined by Dr. Erin Hanlon. She's joined me before on this podcast. She is a sleep researcher. I'll tell you a little bit more about her in just a minute. But she's joining us we'll talk the pros and cons together, and then she's going to share here's the position papers, here's the position statement of essentially the different councils, the different groups of sleep researchers. And there's the American Academy of Sleep Medicine. There's also the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms. What are those folks? What are those experts saying on it? So I know we all have our opinions. I don't know how to put into words just how I feel when it's standard time, but when it gets dark and, in the depths of the winter here in New Orleans, it's, getting dark around 5 p.m. And I feel like just a heaviness with that. I feel like there's so much of the day that is still left, yet I'm not getting like the full experience of that day. There's things I might want to do outside or go for a walk in the evenings. And it almost feels like that day got cut short when it gets dark so early. So for me personally, I love daylight savings time when it was light until past 7 p.m., past 8 p.m. The flip side is people say, well, I don't like waking up when it's dark. And for me, I think I'm typically an early riser, especially during the week. And so a lot of times I may be up before the sun anyway. So I think I don't experience such a hard transition with that, but I know that's not the case for everyone. And this is where the great debate comes in. So today I am joined by Dr. Erin Hanlon. Erin, welcome.
Thank you. Thanks for having me again.
So, to share a little bit about you with our listeners, Dr. Erin Hanlon is a research associate professor in the Department of Medicine at the University of Chicago, and she received her undergrad degree at Duke, her PhD in neuroscience from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And she's a behavioral neuroscientist, and her primary research interests they include the detrimental effects of sleep loss. And that's what we've talked about before on this podcast. It was actually a two-parter. We had so much incredible information, a two-parter. So how does sleep benefit our health? What's the link between sleep deficiency, obesity, diabetes? And specifically, Dr. Hanlon is focused on the effect of sleep restriction on brain reward, also our metabolic system. And what I love about you, Dr. Hanlon, is that you have this remarkable ability, and I appreciate it so much, to take these complex conversations and really break it down so that information is very approachable, and you talk through it in a way that resonates with us and is like truly impactful. So with that,
Thank you. I mean, I will say though, sleep is kind of an easy thing to talk about because everybody does it. So everybody kind of, at least we're all starting from the same basic understanding of what sleep is.
Right.
Whereas it's not always the case with everything with science.
Right. And when it comes to this topic, the great debate of, daylight savings time, or there's several different options here. One is daylight savings time. Well, let's also say why we're talking about this. As we're recording the podcast right now, the Senate voted last week to end this twice a year practice of springing forward and falling back. They voted with a bill that would make daylight savings time permanent. And the legislation passed the Senate unanimously. The next steps would be that it has to still get through the House, still be signed by President Biden to become law. And this has happened before. This has come up year after year.
Right.
Is this the furthest it's got in a while?
I think so. I think the last time this was tried was in the 70s. And during that time also, permanent daylight savings time was enacted, and it only lasted 2 years because it became so unpopular.
This time it got through the Senate at a time that, tell me what it was like. Y'all think it might be a little bit of a coup.
Well, we were all just laughing because because of the pandemic, there haven't been a lot of in-person society meetings. And, there's different society meetings for, the U.S. only, or North America only, or Europe only. And we have this world sleep meeting, so it's everybody around the world goes to one location to talk about sleep and circadian research, and to show what we've been doing lately, and just talk about ideas to come up with new research ideas and things like this. And so the first time there's been a meeting, I think in 3 years, was last week. So all of the United States sleep and circadian researchers, or a lot of them, were in Italy for the World Sleep Meeting in Rome. And so everybody was laughing because we were like, wait a minute, they passed this law while the majority of sleep researchers that have been lobbying for this to go the other way were out of the country.
It's hilarious. They're like, quick, go right now.
Yeah. They're on a different time zone. They're not going to see this for, until their next morning.
That's actually really funny. And it's, you feel the other way, that because I asked you, and we'll get to some of the pros and cons that we talked about. We'll talk about the position statements, but I asked Erin ahead of time, I said, okay, you sent over the here's the position statements, here's this. And I said, tell me about you personally, though, kind of taking that out. And for you, you said it's a little bit hard for you to separate the science from personal preference, but
it's hard to separate the science from the personal preference, right? Like, so if we think about what we discussed earlier in regards to sleep loss and its influence or association with obesity and diabetes and things like this, I know that not sleeping enough impacts health. And so even if I didn't want to sleep 8 hours a night, which I do, I would have a hard time only sleeping 6 hours a night, knowing what that was doing to me, right? Just like knowing how much, sugar impacts sugar intake impacts weight or glucose tolerance, things like this, that influences how much sugar I eat. I just can't separate the two.
Right.
And so knowing what permanent daylight savings time would do to me personally, because the older I get, I'm becoming more of an early riser, but I definitely need sunlight in the morning to get me going. So that is my personal impact, but also I know what a permanent daylight savings would do to public health in general. So for me, it's kind of hard to separate my personal thoughts from the scientific evidence. So because of that, I'm in favor of permanent standard time. I will say there is a debate between, whether or not we should be on permanent daylight savings or permanent standard, but there's no debate in that nobody wants to switch anymore. Right? Like everybody wants to be one time.
Yeah.
It's just the debate is which time to be on. I don't think there's really a group that's like, or maybe they're not a very vocal group that's saying, no, we should keep switching. So
Right.
at least
You don't ever hear anybody around the time changes is like, oh, yes. Well, you know what? I sort of am when it's spring forward. I'm like, finally, longer days. But I don't like the transition. Right.
Right. The transition really affects me, and it really affects me in the spring. I have a really hard time when the daylight savings switch happens, and I have less of a hard time when the standard switch happens in the fall. I'm not good on less sleep. And so it really gets me.
And we'll talk about why.
For those first 2 days.
Yeah. And some people it's longer than that. And we'll talk about why in a little bit.
Some people never
too.
are able to switch. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Like the entire time. But the melatonin effects and stuff like that. I think kind of one thing that you said that stands out to me is that you do like it whenever it stays later in the day. And that was something we talked about kind of in advance. But even stronger than that is your dislike for waking up to darkness. And so I think I think sort of it boils down to that for when you ask what is someone's opinion of what do they like or not like, it's which do they feel? Because I think most people would say, yeah, I like it being lighter in the day. Very few people are going to be like, no, I really like it that it gets dark at 5 o'clock. But it's which do you feel stronger about, like not waking up to darkness or having that light later in the day? And like I said, for me, if I'm waking up early in the winter, a lot of times it's before the sun is really up anyway. So to me, I don't really feel that shift, but which is not also a natural thing because when we look at what our body clock is versus what our social clock is, which we'll be talking about those things. So I think that's sort of kind of at the cusp of where people's divide is on this. And then a little bit on like the history.
So I will say this, we do actually have like a term for that. And there's questionnaires that are specifically driven towards understanding if people are more morning people or evening people. And they're either larks or owls. And I don't know why we call it the other way around, but all of them are like owls and larks or owl-lark questionnaires and things like this. So if you're a nighttime person, you're an owl. If you're a morning person, you're a lark.
So you're an owl.
I don't really know what I'm
I'm definitely a lark.
I would say I'm more of an owl. Like I'm definitely not the person that wakes up at 5 o'clock in the morning and is like ready to go, But I also, I'm definitely asleep most nights by 11 p.m.
Yeah.
I'm up by 6:30, 7 a.m. without an alarm clock. Like I don't sleep.
That's
with an
impressive.
Alarm clock unless I have to like do something or I've gone to bed too late,
right.
So I have lark tendencies, but I'm probably more of an owl.
Yeah, and I think you're right. It does come down to that. And a lark is funny because a lark, at least here in the South, it's not, as far as I know, a very common bird. So you can replace lark with whatever is the common bird that's waking up in the morning. Right. Here is mockingbirds. What you mentioned too, that, we had tried this once in the 70s and kind of just some history of daylight savings time. It was first established, am I right about this, in 1966 that this first started the daylight savings time?
I think so, yeah.
And it was something that I think was a funny name. It was called the Uniform Time Act. And that was something that started in 1966 and then tried it in the 70s as full-time daylight savings time. As Dr. Hanlon said, it was big, just 2 years that it lasted. So we talked about that there was the trial of daylight savings time in the 70s, but even before that, the first kind of experiment with daylight savings time was during World War I, then again during World War II. And the idea behind this was to help conserve energy, and that having more sunlight in the evening would reduce our reliance and our consumption of energy. And because we did, if you got light more, you need light in the house less. And the early morning hours when it is darker, more people might be sleeping and they're not having as much energy. They're not doing as much kind of out and about that they would need it. So that's sort of the World War I, World War II, and then in the 60s is when it was officially instituted. And then in the 80s and then the early 2000s, it sort of shifted of exactly when daylight savings time started and switched back to standard time. So there's been a little bit of rearranging of exactly like when the window of daylight savings time is. But essentially, this is something that's we've been doing this back and forth since about the 60s, with that exception of that 2 years where we tried it fully. So when we're talking about kind of the pros and cons, which do you want to start on? Do you want to start? I'm going to link to two articles that were that the New York Times featured this week that I thought were great. One is 5 ways that life would be better if it were always daylight savings time. And then one is why daylight savings time is unhealthy.
Yeah. So I would back up just one step, even before talking about the pros and cons, and kind of give a little bit of an overview of circadian mechanisms or circadian clocks, just to kind of have an idea of even why we talk about these things. So, now I don't even remember, but in the 1700s, I'll say, there was he was a philosopher, I think, or an astronomer, who then became like a chronobiologist, is what we call them. But there was a French scientist, and his name was Jean-Jacques. I'm French speaking, so Jean-Jacques de Meran. And he noticed that like a plant would open and close during the day, right? Like it was open at some point during the day and it would close at some point during the day. And he wondered what was influencing this plant opening and closing. And so what he did was a very simple experiment. He basically put the plant in a box so that it couldn't see the sun. And he observed that while in the box, not seeing the sun, this plant still opened and closed. So I think he posited that, the plant was still able to sense the sun in some way. That's what he posited. But what we now know to be true, or now understand, is that plant had its own endogenous rhythm or circadian rhythm. And circadian means about a day or about a 24-hour period, circa diem. And so we now understand that every cell, every person, plants, et cetera, have circadian rhythms, and they're endogenous to us. So, just like that plant, I have circadian rhythms for different hormones and body temperature and attention and focus, and when it's best to exercise, things like this. And the sun is actually a zeitgeber is what we call it, but it's really a time cue. So we have our endogenous rhythms, and our body goes in this like 24-hour cycle or about 24-hour cycle, but it also is entrained by the zeitgeber of the sun. So each day when you wake up, you see the sun, and your brain then knows, okay, it's about this time of day, and it's kind of in line with our internal circadian rhythm. And so that's just one, those are some terms I'm going to use that are important when we're discussing this shift in time, and what time the day is, depending on where the sun is in the sky, basically.
And would a way
but I always thought that was super interesting. That
too.
like just these like just a very small thing, like, oh, this plant is opening and closing. And does it do it on its own, or, is it doing it because of some signal in the environment? Was just such a simple experiment that, spurned, hundreds of years of circadian research. I think that's just so cool.
It's very fascinating.
Right? So I wanted to say that first, just so that everybody kind of had an understanding of, I won't use the word zeitgeber, but I'll use time cue, but just so that you have an idea of like what circadian is, or what circadian rhythms are, or the circadian system.
Would another way to think of that be like our body clock versus the sun clock?
Exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. So like your internal body clock versus the sun clock versus
The social
shift
clock.
workers. Yeah, exactly. The social clock, in terms of like shift workers don't see the sun clock very often, right? Because they're up during the night, but their body clock is saying it's daytime because they're awake.
Right. And we didn't talk about this in our big two-parter on sleep and wellness, but from a nutritional perspective, the clients that I've worked with who have struggled the most and have the biggest challenges are shift workers, people who are awake during that window of time that they should be sleeping. And it can be someone who might be relatively fit. And when they switch to that night shift,
totally,
it's
fascinating, right? It's fascinating. I was involved in a study in which we were examining people before and after they have bariatric surgery and examining like circadian things in those individuals. But I remember one of the bariatric surgeons saying that like the people that have the hardest time after surgery, like they're doing everything they're supposed to be doing, they're following the rules, they have had bariatric surgery, but they will end up gaining weight even though they're doing everything they're supposed to do. And those people are invariably shift workers.
Right.
So like regardless of, all of the interventions, the shift work in itself is enough to perturb the system so much that they just can't overcome it. It's fascinating.
Yes, I see that. I think nurses who are working kind of the overnight shift, it's so much. So when we're talking pros and cons, and one of the things that I thought was hilarious, we've talked about that it's polarizing, and I'm sort of saying it like tongue in cheek, jokingly, because like we said, there's so much really big stuff. However, as we're talking about the impact that sleep and light has on our bodies, this is also very important. But the debate about this, one of the things that I didn't tell you earlier, but I thought it was hilarious. They're talking about the senators as they're pushing it through the Senate where they did get approved. There was one senator who said, today the Senate has finally delivered on some things something that Americans all over the country want, to never have to change their clocks again. It's like
Drama.
Is that fantastic though? And I thought the gravity of that statement,
Yeah.
So
I mean, that's definitely politics, right? That's a business thing. So I could be able to hang my hat on it later. Yeah.
So let's talk. I think we're going to spend, because spoiler alert, the position of the sleep research experts is standard time. So let's go first to why there's some theories that it would be better if it were daylight savings time, which is my preference. Let's talk that first, because then I think we'll be kind of shifting to why the preference of sleep experts is standard time. And, I understand, and a lot of times, people use the phrase follow the science, or, what does the data say? And this is one where I do think, yes, we can see what the data says, and then there's still going to be a personal preference there,
Right.
Let's take a minute to talk about Nutrafol, one of our partners for this week's episode. The nutrients and Nutrafol supplements support healthy hair growth from within by targeting the 5 root causes of thinning: stress, hormones, environment, nutrition, and metabolism. Nutrafol is a physician-formulated nutritional supplement that's made with potent botanicals. So no matter your stage in life, Nutrafol has a solution. They offer targeted formulas for women and men that are clinically shown to improve hair growth and thickness through all stages of life. You can grow thicker, healthier hair and support our show by going to Nutrafol.com, entering promo code FUELED to save $15 off your first month's subscription. This is their best offer anywhere, and it's only available to U.S. customers for a limited time. Plus, free shipping on every order. Get $15 off at Nutrafol.com. That's spelled Nutrafol.com, promo code FUELED. When we talk about why it would be better if it's daylight savings time, there's a lot of, one is what I see really a lot is the shift in physical activity that's happening just even in our neighborhood. The not necessarily even purposeful exercise, but people are just outside. They're doing stuff in their yard. They're taking walks. They're doing stuff, they're just moving more versus parking it inside when it's dark at 5. So that, I think, the physical movement, something that I hadn't really thought about until I was looking into this is the economy.
Yeah.
I thought
that's a big driver, and I feel like, unfortunately, that's what drives a lot of
maybe that's why it passed this in the Senate when y'all were all out of town. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, just that, if you think about it, it does feel less daunting to go out, run those errands when you get off of work and it's still plenty of daylight and you're going to hop in your car, you're going to do these errands. Whereas if you get off of work and it's 5 o'clock or whatever, and it's, really dark, you feel like you just kind of need to go straight home. And so I think when you look at how people are living their life, they're out shopping, they're running errands, they're spending money. So I hadn't really thought about the economy flourishing as also as just that the activity, the physical activity, and that, I guess, spending time with friends, family, outdoors.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting because of the two articles that I think you're going to post that you sent, of the pros and cons that you sent to me, what I thought was most striking is kind of speaks to exactly what you're saying, is that the position, the person that wrote the position to stay on daylight savings was a law professor,
right?
While the person that wrote the position to stay on standard time seemed to be a scientist. And I think that kind of speaks to like the crux of it, right? Like,
I looked at
are we more interested in public health or the other aspects of our society?
I was like, law professor. So I did a Google and I was like, why is the New York Times sharing something that a law professor wrote? And he's a law professor at the University of Washington. And what his bio says, that he's expert in, and you'll like this, controversial and public policy. And so the topics he's expert in include daylight savings time. Also, by the way, drone technology and organ donation. So I thought
those are very disparate.
Yeah. And also, as he says, controversial policy.
Yeah.
So that I noticed the same thing.
I mean, when you were talking, I was actually thinking, and I don't know what the numbers are, but I also wonder what percentage of our population are larks compared to owls.
Right.
I simply don't know that, because that would help also understand, who this would not necessarily benefit, because regardless of your owl or larkness, you still have your endogenous clock. But it might be, skewed one way versus the other. But that would help me also to understand, because I personally just don't understand why people would want to stay on daylight.
Right. And then here I am like, oh my gosh, I don't ever want to switch.
I mean, I hear you. I completely understand why, but at the same time, I'm like, if you live in Washington State, the sun's not going to come up until 9 a.m.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's interesting because also depending on where you are in that time zone, here, sort of the height of daylight savings time, it stays daylight in New Orleans till maybe 8, and your Central Time as well in Chicago. Is it about 8 o'clock at night it stays light till?
Yeah, about that. Yeah, and it's awesome. I love it. I can't say that I don't. I love it. Love it.
Have you ever been to Paris in the summertime?
No, I have not.
Okay, we had the opportunity one time to go, and it was right at the end of May, first part of June, and it was the wildest thing. It was daylight past 11 p.m.
Yeah, so I've been to Amsterdam in the summertime.
It was like this.
Or the Netherlands.
I guess everywhere in the longitudinal axis would be. I'm like, it's Paris.
Right. Yeah, no, but it was a little, again, because I already was a sleep researcher at the time, so it was also a little disconcerting to me. I was like, oh my gosh, it's so light, so late,
it makes you feel like it was 8 p.m.
So pushed back.
Yeah. And then you would still be out at doing the things you would do, like your normal cues, as you said, to start winding down your day. You would feel like it must be 8 p.m. and then you would look and you're like, oh my gosh, it's 11. And then, yes, your entire schedule is shifted off. Of course, for us being there and we weren't in a normal work mode and stuff, it was great because we had so much that we could do and experience.
You could sleep in.
Right. Yeah. But normally that would be hard. And then some of the other things that this article talks about, and not just this article, but others, is, safety and not having as many people who are driving in the evening and when it's dark. And if talking about like if you're going to be driving in the morning when it's dark versus in the evening when it's dark, people might be more likely to drink in the evenings. They're more in a hurry to get home, all this kind of stuff that, there's the safety factor, there's the crime factor, there's the energy factor, kind of why we used it in World War I and II. And then these things that we talked about of kind of the personal reasons of why I love it. And so I think, and as you said, I hadn't really thought of it, but that economy benefit may also be a large part of also why it's a little bit politically polarizing.
Right.
So,
I mean, but it's interesting because I also understood that in regards to energy saved, we also learned from the experiment, I'll call it, in the 70s that the amount of energy utilized wasn't actually saved. It ended up being about the same. So, I think some of the pro arguments to staying on daylight savings time are less kind of, I would say, public health reasons. Accidents might be considered a public health reason, but conserving energy, not necessarily a public health reason. A decrease in crime, that can be kind of targeted by other measures and not necessarily daylight savings. So it's interesting to me that those arguments are used to save daylight savings or to make daylight savings the permanent one when there are less like public health concerns. Not making them any less valid. It's just interesting.
Right. As far as like who's interested and why. And when we'll shift and we'll talk kind of maybe the downsides, but before we talk about the downsides of daylight savings time in general, one thing that kind of both of the organizations, the American Academy of Sleep Medicine and then also the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms, both noted that there actually hasn't yet been long-term research about the chronic effects of staying in daylight savings time year round. So that hasn't been well studied. So most of the things we'll be talking about that have been studied are around that transition. So you heard Erin say earlier that when she springs forward, she's reeling a little bit more. It impacts her more than in the fall when we do the fall back. And so that's really where more of the research has been. There hasn't been at least published data that is saying, here's the difference of long-term daylight savings time. I guess because, it just really hasn't happened. So a lot of what we were talking about is the shift and then also the impact of waking up in those darker hours.
Well, I will also say, though, there are not necessarily long-term, but we use this term called social jet lag.
Yeah.
And social jet lag refers to kind of your endogenous clock or your endogenous circadian rhythm being misaligned from the environmental time or the sun time, basically. And so people can experience social jet lag from, not sleeping enough during the week and then catching up on the weekend because of work schedules or whatever it may be, and just being a little bit delayed or advanced because of just not getting enough sleep and having to get up early and just not being aligned with the environmental cues. So we call that social jet lag. So there are some studies in regards to social jet lag, but not in a chronic, 12 months or, 18-month cycle or something like this. But we do have some studies that indicate that the misalignment between your internal clock and when the sun comes up, even by like 2 or 3 hours, is detrimental.
And that's really where it comes down to, because is it correct to say that standard time, which is more kind of that winter time, more closely aligns with, like we were saying, that circadian rhythm, our natural body clocks? Okay. Talk to us a little bit about that.
It. So I'll actually share with you a really nice little infographic that the Society for Research on Biological Rhythms created. And it shows that, like during standard time, the sun time, let's say, when it's in the middle of the sky, will be at noon, and our internal clock also is saying that it's noon, just because, that's what our endogenous rhythm is. And in that way, we're aligned. Excuse me. And when daylight savings occurs, the sun time will say that it's 11 a.m. and our internal clock says that it's 12 p.m. And so we're only, misaligned by about an hour, which our body can kind of deal with. And it's not as hazardous as a longer misalignment. So when we are on standard time, when you're on like the West Coast, you're misaligned by, or on the west edge of a time zone, you're misaligned by about an hour. But when you go into daylight savings and it's shifted again, you're misaligned by about 2 hours. And so that causes even greater, I would say, social jet lag. And this is when you get into the detrimental effects of sleep loss and circadian misalignment. So we are, in fact, more aligned with our internal clock is more aligned with the environmental clock or the sun when we're on standard time.
And that, if we were going to boil it down, is that sort of at the core of why sleep researchers firmly believe that standard time is better?
Exactly. That's all it is, really. Like just having our internal clock be more aligned with what's going on outside. Because when we're not aligned and our internal clock isn't aligned with what's going on outside, that's when we have all of the health concerns, like we were discussing in regards to shift work. Like that's a drastic shift, right? But there's still, when there's just these small shifts between our internal clock and the external world, there's still some detrimental effects that can be, cardiac, they can be cognitive, they can be in relation to glucose control and insulin sensitivity. All of that stuff is affected by that misalignment.
And that's where,
not without saying that, like during daylight savings, we spring ahead, right? So that first night we're actually losing sleep. And some people continue to lose sleep. So we discussed previously all the detrimental effects of short sleep. And so when the sun is up longer during the night, like we were just talking about traveling in Europe and the sun's up until 11 p.m., you don't feel like you need to go to sleep, right? So you stay up longer. And because there's so much light, your circadian rhythm is actually pushed to later. Like your body is actually saying, wait, we don't need to we don't need to go to sleep until later because the sun is still out. But you still wake up at 7 o'clock in the morning because you have to go to work or whatever it is. And so you start to have shorter sleep during that daylight savings period as well.
And one of the things that, is sort of a understanding of the why behind that is, our brains release melatonin, and this is a hormone that causes us to feel sleepy whenever it starts to be time to go to sleep. Melatonin, I think most of us have that association, but that exposure to light, and especially later in the evening, it delays our brain's release of melatonin.
Yep. So light actually inhibits the release of melatonin. So that's why we, always tell people, this is exactly why we're telling people, like, don't have blue light exposure when you're trying to go to bed, right? Like, wear those blue glasses or have the blue light filter on your computer screen or your TV or your tablet or whatever it is, because that light actually inhibits melatonin release from your pineal glands.
So starting to turn your lights down early, turn off electronics, like separating from all these things.
Exactly.
And so the outside light is also so much stronger and powerful than like what our lights are inside. And so when we have that staying up, again, the melatonin is not released as it would be otherwise. And so that's part of why we just don't feel sleepy whenever it's daylight outside. And so all of that starts to shift it. Talking about that shift that happens when it springs forward, that is where there's kind of accumulating evidence that shows that transition is really hard. So like we said, there's people who love standard time. There's people who love savings time. The sleep researchers vote for standard time. We all agree we don't like that shift. And there is more heart attacks, more depression, more car accidents in that window right after a time shift.
Exactly. I mean, I will say personally, and this might sound morbid, but it's the truth. So my father actually passed away in his late 40s from a cardiac event. And so now the older that I get, when daylight savings happens, like regardless of, if I try to go to bed early to deal with that shift, that first morning of daylight savings, I am always so aware of like
how you're feeling.
Heart. Yes, totally, 100%. That probably doesn't aid in my ability in not being great at shifting. Like I'm probably putting undue pressure and stress and anxiety on the situation. That probably doesn't help, but it is at the forefront of my mind. Like it's just a reality, And I think the same of everybody around me. I'm very aware of.
You're very worried, right?
Yeah.
And would that be part of what was also kind of in that that social jet lag that you were talking about? Would that be sort of in the
exactly
acute,
that's part of it.
And then it lasts for a lot of people throughout daylight savings?
Yeah, some people are actually better. It's called habituation, but some people are better at these switches than others. Some people, you know, their circadian clocks never really habituate and shift to the new schedule. They always stay a little bit misaligned in regards to the clock time or the sun time. And other people are more amenable to the switch. They're easily switched. Their physiology, you know, not just, you know, their thought processes or something.
Mm-hmm.
So it is kind of an individual thing, whether or not people are more easily adaptable to the switches than others. But that's exactly it. It's that when there is that kind of misalignment. So when you wake up in the morning on daylight savings and I guess depending where you are within a time zone, but when you wake up and it's still dark out, but your brain is saying and your body is saying, okay, let's get going. I will say this in regards to what we were discussing about melatonin. So melatonin is inhibited by sun or light, right? At the same time, melatonin inhibits insulin secretion. So this would be of interest to you. So if melatonin has been pushed to being produced later in the evening, that means it's still pretty high in the morning. It hasn't already declined. But when you wake up in the morning and it's not light out, and so melatonin is still being released, or, you know, it's a little bit less than it was at nighttime, but it's still coming, and you get up to have breakfast, well, melatonin is inhibiting insulin secretion. And so you get up, you have breakfast, you start your day, but your body isn't responding to that meal like it should.
Almost like the shift workers we were talking about.
Exactly. So while like it's, you know, again, it's all the science stuff, but while like it's nice and it's fun, I also love it to have like more sun later in the day. It's not necessarily great biologically speaking.
Right. What are some things that someone can do? So, you know, ideally in a perfect world, it would land on either daylight savings time year round or standard time year round, because we all agree both of those are better than the switch for now, because, you know, if what are things that people can do? I know the switch is already passed for this time, or if you are like, I guess maybe with the switch, but also if you are one of those people who struggles to adapt, kind of like one of those long haulers, to use like a COVID term, one of the long haulers for that social jet lag in your transition time as you spring forward. There's some people, like Erin was saying, okay, a couple of days she feels that way and then she'll kind of pull out of it. But for some people, it can last weeks, or they don't transition out of it through the entire daylight savings time. So for someone that's listening they struggle with that every morning or whatever, what are some things that we could do differently to help buffer that response?
Yeah, morning light is important. So, you know, if you can get up and get yourself into a bright space, there are things like light boxes that are used for people that have specifically for like seasonal depression, for people that have a lot of trouble with a short day. They are prescribed light boxes to have that early exposure to light. I think they now come in like glasses forms. You can just put on these glasses that then will shine, you know, some light into your eyes, not like blinding you, but just so that your circadian system sees that light and is like, okay, we have light now. The melatonin is suppressed, right? So then eating and then insulin is secreted. So getting up and trying to get into the habit of exposing yourself to light. Normally we would say go outside to get that light, right? Because the sun is so much stronger than the light you can get in your house. But if we stay on daylight savings and that sunlight isn't there, getting a light box or just even turning all the lights in your house and getting as much light exposure as you can early in the morning will help. I
think I may have told you that whenever I wake up early, did I tell you I do what we call the Al Roker in our household?
No, this is new news.
Years ago, I saw an interview with Al Roker of the Today Show, and it was like, you know, the interviewer was asking him how does he wake up so early? Because I mean, he wakes up at like whatever it is, 2:30 in the morning, and he said no matter what he's doing or no matter what time that we would think is just horrifyingly early that he has to wake up, he said he turns on the lights, you know, in the bathroom or whatever, but he splashes cold water on his face, and that sort of immediately is like refreshing and wakes him up and kind of starts that process of, you know, I guess, you know, tamping down the melatonin and all of the different, you know, things to kind of set his circadian rhythm to do what he can to control that. So since then, I mentioned I'll wake up early. So I'll wake up my alarm because I do wake up by an alarm during the week, and I'll, turn on the water, splash it cold on my face, and I'll turn on the bathroom light or the light in my closet, which is right there so as not to disturb my husband. And I did this for years. And finally my husband asked just a couple of years ago, why do you always go in the bathroom and put splash of water on your face first thing in the morning? I was like, well, it's Al Roker, So I tell him, and now he knows if I'm waking up earlier, if he happens to be rustling because he sleeps in a little later than I do, if he hears me waking up, he's like, you gonna go do the Al Roker? Yes.
No, what's so funny though is that can be a Zeitgeber, right? That can be a time cue. The splashing of the cold water on your face tells your body and tells your brain, okay, we're starting the day today. Let's get ready. It's just sleep hygiene when we say you can go through some behaviors at nighttime to kind of wind your body down, and your brain starts to learn that these are the cues to go to sleep. So your Al Roker is a cue that okay, the day is starting. I might not be getting that dose of sun, but I know that this bout of activity is a Zeitgeber, and this splash of water is the time cue to say the day is starting. So here we go, body.
So now he's gonna be like, you doing the Al Roker? I'm actually doing my Zeitgeber. I'm giving my body the Zeitgeber. But that's awesome. It's finding something like that. Like you said, turning on the lights, a light box. Have you seen the light glasses? What do they look like?
I have not seen them in person. I can say that. I haven't seen them in person, but I have seen them in demonstrations that people use. They just look like little sunglasses, and they'll have little and it's not, I don't think it's meant to be excuse me, intrusive, right? It's not supposed to be blinding you. It's just a stronger light signal, because the closer the light is to your eyes, the more your eyes are going to take it in, right? So you could have a light bulb that, is on the ceiling, but once it reaches your eyes, it's a different lux.
I did just do a quick Google of these, and just a fair warning to anybody listening to this. If you put these on in the morning, whoever's in your family might get the giggles at you, They are glasses, and they look just as comfortable as regular glasses, but they do have a little bit of a different sci-fi look to them.
Yeah.
But whatever works.
I mean, they're oh gosh, I can't think of the cartoon, but yes.
The Jetsons.
They seem to work. At least they definitely work for some individuals with seasonal depression, right? It helps to alleviate some of those depression symptoms. So if you're having trouble during daylight savings, it's via the same mechanism. It's because of the light exposure. So if you can get some of that light in early in the morning that you're not getting from the sun, it should help.
Yes. No, I'm giggling a little bit at them, but I am absolutely, for someone who struggles with that, and the Al Roker splash and turning on a couple of lights just doesn't do it for you. This can be a solution, and they're not inexpensive. I'm seeing some that, they look like they start around, $200. But if this is something that is a physical struggle for you, and maybe you also like having that light through the evenings, but boy, it's really hard for you in the morning, something like that can be a solution. I think it's the Jetsons you were talking about, because they do look like something from the Jetsons.
Oh, yeah. Right. Thank you. But if anybody's looking for them, they're called light therapy glasses.
Yes. Yeah.
Light therapy is the therapy.
So for now, we are doing the switch back and forth, and people do have their challenges with the different times of when it is. Daylight savings time does extend the longest, because it'll be from March until November. And so, we'll spend, just as we were talking, kind of the most challenging time people have is not so much that they're upset they have these extra hours in the day, but at night, if you find that you're having a hard time bringing yourself down in time for sleep, starting to do those things that are just good sleep hygiene anyway, of turning some of the lights down, separating from the screens, the blue lights, starting to set yourself up for sleep, just like the things we've talked about in the past about getting good sleep. And then on that flip side, how are we starting to reset your internal body clock for morning, even if it's dark outside?
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, sweet. Well, thank you very much for this. And we'll see where things go. If it gets approved or not.
Fingers crossed. sleep researcher side.
Right, exactly. Well, I appreciate your time as always. Anytime I have a sleep question or sleep conversation to have, I always love reaching out to you. I appreciate it.
I'd love to come back anytime.
It's always so much fun having Dr. Erin Hanlon join us. She, as I said, she takes the science, translates it into, just conversation that we can easily understand and helps educate us along the way and makes it fun. And as always, we'll include the links that we talked about in the show notes of this episode. And let me know what you think. Where do you stand? Are you a daylight savings time fan, or do you prefer standard time? And I hope that some of the strategies that she shared as far as how to make it easier to transition into daylight savings time, if you're not a fan, I hope that those help you. And if they do, I always want to hear about it. I am registered dietitian Molly Kimball, and you've been listening to Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, the podcast. If you'd like more Fueled Wellness and Nutrition, please head over to mollykimball.com, and you can follow me, Molly Kimball RD, on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And if you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Join us next week for another dose of Fueled Wellness and Nutrition. Thanks for listening, and stay focused on living your strongest, healthiest life.